This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and tonight I'd like to think a bit, talk a bit about the roles of husband and wife. And rather than have this be an opinion fest where 100 people stand in a room and fire off 100 different opinions about these things, I'd like to try and establish some principles that give some order and certainty to this discussion. And to be honest, in this generation, there's so little accountability for any ideas. People are allowed to say anything they want, and when we watch to see or look to see what the results of these opinions are, we just get fed with endless excuses for why the results shouldn't be taken into consideration in judgment of the opinions. And this is what destroys much of the moral discussion in this generation, is that we're told that we're not allowed to look at the results, or we're directed to results that really have nothing to do with the question. So, for example, we could talk about parenting, and as I've talked about this in the past, we can talk about parenting and say, well, let's look at the results. And by results, we mean the outcomes of the children's adult lives, which really has nothing to do with parenting received, and this can be easily proven. There are examples all through sacred scripture of virtuous men raising sons who choose to become evil. Virtuous men raising one good son, one bad son. Excellent teachers raising one famous disciple and another infamous disciple. The choices of children and students are related to their free will and can't be charged to their teachers. I even explain in a positive sense that schools can't be credited for the achievements of their students, because ultimately the students have decisions to make in their freedom that ultimately determine their success. The school is like the farmer who fills the water tank. He can fill the water tank and make it available for the animals, but the animals have to come and drink from it. The same is true in parenting. Parents can provide all of the resources that children need to do well in life. And these are the duties of parents. Parents are not obligated to make their children Christians. I just talked about this yesterday. And so sometimes we look at results that are actually not related to the works or the ideas, but we should look to the results that are in fact related to the ideas. And again, I've explained this with parenting. I've said if we want to know if parents have fulfilled their duties and raised Catholic children, we should look to the Church's judgment with regard to the sacrament of confirmation. If a child is confirmed by a bishop in the faith, obviously, and I'm talking about confirmation when a teenage Catholic child is interviewed, taught, and approved for the sacrament of confirmation. Obviously, to be in that position, a child needs to have been raised to be a Catholic. And the bishop, or in some cases a priest, makes the judgment that the student is well prepared for the sacrament of confirmation. That's an objective way to evaluate whether Catholic parents have fulfilled their duties. In rhetoric, just to touch on this a little bit more, Aristotle would explain that a speaker or writer can't be judged for the judgment of his audience, but he should be judged according to the art of rhetoric, whether he has made use of every available means of persuasion. He can't effect the decision of the audience. He can simply fulfill his role as making every available argument and making use of every available proof that would lead a reasonable audience to judge rightly. But if the audience chooses to judge contrary to reason, the speaker is not at fault for the unreasonable decision of the audience. And so it is true for us that we need to be careful that we don't judge an opinion or an idea by a result, because the results may not actually be related to the idea or activity. But in many cases, there are outcomes that do in fact relate to the ideas and activities, and we should look to those outcomes. That's why Jesus could say, "A tree is known by its fruits." The fruits most certainly reveal the health of the tree. So when it comes to discussions about marriage and the roles of husband and wife, we can have 100 different opinions, but ultimately we're going to need to look at some results. And so we can listen to all of the opinions, but then there comes a time where we have to look and see if any of these opinions seems to be producing better results than others, and if any opinions actually produce terrible results. Now, my views of marriage and the roles of husband and wife are not simply Christian views. I believe they are Christian. I believe they're the views taught by sacred scripture and taught throughout church history, but my views are rooted in natural philosophy and moral philosophy. They were taught by Greek philosophers before the Christian church was even established. This is how wise men thought about marriage even before Christianity. It was understood that the husband had a certain role to fulfill, and the wife also had a role to fulfill. Now, the end of marriage is the production of children. That has always been understood. That's the essential outcome, the essential purpose of marriage. And I can't remember who said it. If I think I might be able to remember. Maybe it was St. Thomas. But it was said that if man in the Garden of Eden needed a helper, it was not good for him to live alone. If he simply needed some help for the work of farming, a woman would not have been the ideal helper. It would have been better for God to give Adam another man to help him with the work of farming. But God gave Adam a woman to be his wife, to complement him and to help him. And the essential quality of that wife was that the wife, together with Adam, would be able to reproduce and bear children. And so we see the essential purpose of marriage is for procreation, for the production of children. If people didn't want to have children, getting married would make no sense. And this is what's wrong with gay marriage and any other kind of wacky, unnatural relationships. The purpose of marriage is procreation. That's the principal purpose. If that's not in place, there really is no reason to get married. So that's the principal purpose. But then, once a child's born, we now move into other purposes of marriage and a question of how these different purposes might be fulfilled. And the ancient philosophers made arguments about these things. So, for example, a man and a woman marry, they act naturally, the woman bears a child. Now this child has needs, and the needs are of two different kinds. Some of the needs may be procured from the parents directly, some of them must be procured from outside the home. So we're going to need to go outside the home for some of these needs, and some of these needs are provided within the home. For example, the newborn child needs to eat, and the food that the newborn child needs to eat is milk, and the milk is present in the mother's body. So nature makes it very clear that the mother is to be the caretaker of the infant child. And this was taught by Xenophon in his work on the management of a household, written in the 4th century before Christ. So this isn't a Christian idea, this isn't my idea, this is an idea that's obvious to anyone examining the natural world by means of human reason. So it's evident from the beginning that the woman is equipped by nature to be the caretaker of the child. And of course, we can get into all sorts of Rube Goldberg arrangements for how to set up the family. The mother can go work and she can pump her breast milk and leave it home, and the husband can stay home. We can get into all of these crazy arrangements. But the arrangement that nature has made is very clear and simple. The woman obviously needs to be with the child, or at least the child needs to be with the mother. That's obvious and made clear by nature itself. The husband has no attachment to the infant child. There's no reason why he needs to be present with the infant child, and therefore naturally it makes more sense that if things were needed outside of the home, away from the child, he would be the one to go get those things, to go earn those things, to go produce those things, and so on. The woman would stay with the child, and the man would leave the child and go and procure the things that were necessary away from the child. That's obvious according to nature, and so we can see the clear roles of the husband and the wife, or the father and the mother, and these things would be manifested even before the child was born, because the pregnant woman would already be incapable to some degree of being able to run around and work and do things away from the home as she went through the 9 months of pregnancy. So this would already be manifest through pregnancy. Women deal with morning sickness and all kinds of physical troubles throughout pregnancy. Some women have very little difficulties, but usually at some point along the way, women go through very difficult times during pregnancy, and then as the time of delivery approaches, things tend to get worse and worse until finally the woman is delivered and pregnancy ends, and then she goes through a time of recovery and nursing, and eventually gets back on her feet. So we can see the woman through pregnancy and childbearing, which is essential, as I said, the principal purpose of marriage, is taken out of the equation as far as leaving the home, going out, and having the household depend upon her consistent, rigorous work to procure the family's needs. Doesn't make much sense to pin that duty on the woman when her physical condition is going to vary so much, while the physical condition of the man doesn't vary at all. He's stable through all these things, through all these changes of the woman. The man is unaffected by these things, and he's unaffected that he may work. And so we see the clear emergence of the roles through a simple study of nature. The man is always left unimpeded to work and provide. The woman is the one who endures all of the changes and goes through all of the difficulties of pregnancy and childbearing and nursing. And these things fill entire calendar years, 9 months of pregnancy, a year or more of nursing, and then possible pregnancy starting all over again, on and on for years and years. The married woman is not in a position to go out and be depended upon for steady work away from the home. It doesn't make any sense to have the household depend upon a woman, a married woman, for its outside provisions. That's the man's responsibility because he's unimpeded from those activities. It's very simple. The woman needs to rest and care for herself, care for her body, avoid taking any risks that could threaten the health and development of the child in her womb. And that's going to continue all through pregnancy and into infancy as the child's born, and then the child has to be cared for and watched and protected and fed and changed and washed, and there's a lot of work involved, and it's a full-time occupation. And the woman is best equipped for that work. And again, we can come up with some wacky arrangements and say, look, it can be done like this, it can be done like this, but we're talking about the most efficient and the best of all circumstances, the best option, not just a possible option, but the best option, the most natural and obvious arrangement. So the man's career, the man's work can be depended upon. It's stable, it's reliable, it's unimpeded. The woman's life as a married woman, if she's going to be bearing children, is constantly changing, unpredictable, unstable. And she doesn't need to be burdened with this pressure of going and doing things while her body is already doing so much. She needs to be taken care of and protected. She should stay at home where she's safe, where she can take care of herself, where she can take care of a child, where a child can be safe. That's obviously the best arrangement. And so we see the basic relationship between the husband and wife is that the husband is the one who goes out, obtains what's necessary, and brings it home for the family's use. The wife stays home, takes care of herself and of the children. That's the natural arrangement. That's the natural division of labor between a husband and wife. Now, once the children are born, other duties arise. Education is one of these duties. Increasing costs of provisions needed by the children arises. It's one thing to provide an infant with some breast milk. It's a different thing to feed a teenager, to provide a child with education, and so on. So this financial burden increases over time and puts more pressure on the husband to obtain what's needed. Now, naturally, this burden increases over time, and the husband has time to build and develop his ability to earn what his family needs. It's not demanded of him all at once. Just as the family grows, his career and ability to generate an honest income should also increase. And so as these things develop, the husband, living like the ant and looking to the future, should be working, knowing of the evil that's coming, as it were, and preparing for it. Just as the ant prepares for winter. That's what the Proverbs teach us. So the man has years and years to develop his ability to generate honest income for his family, while the wife normally goes through multiple pregnancies and childbirths and is constantly caring for herself and for infants and for other children and so on. So again, as the family's needs increase over time, this same original division of labor provides for it and is reasonable and appears to be natural. And so we see that these two different sets of duties emerge. The wife spends her time in the home with the children, and there are natural reasons for that, physical reasons for that. The man is free to leave the home, to go out and work to procure the things that are needed by the wife and children. And this is a simple division of labor, simple arrangement of household life. And again, this is not a Christian idea, this is not a Catholic idea, this is not my kooky idea. This has been taught all through history and was written of in detail in Xenophon's work on household management 400 years before Christ. So we can't simply dismiss this as being some Christian idea because it's based in philosophy. It can't be considered an ancient pagan idea because it's continued in Christianity. And it was the norm throughout history up until modern times when democracy allowed everyone to go nuts. So that's the normal division of labor. Now, the way I like to think of this in my own family, because the time comes eventually where childbearing stops. For my wife, we had our first child when she was 25 years old. We both were 25 years old. That's when our first child arrived. And our last child, our 10th child, was born 14 years later. So we had 10 children in 14 years. I think that's right. 2000 to 2014. Yeah, that's right. 10 children in 14 years. It doesn't sound right, but let me just think about that a minute. Anna, right now, it's 2022. Anna is 7. So we go back 7 years. Yeah, that's the end of 2014. So from 2000 to 2014, my wife had 10 children. And then in 2014, it stopped. There were no more babies, and we now have 10 children, the youngest of whom is turning 8. So now, as 47-year-olds, we're in a different phase of life. All of a sudden, my wife is free from childbearing. My wife is not nursing any babies. My wife is not changing any diapers. My wife is spending her day with children ages 8 and above. Our life is very different. We have adult children. We have children in college. We have children in high school. We have teenagers in the home. Our life is very different. We're able to work together. My wife's ability to work with me is unimpeded. This phase of our life is very different. And yet, those original roles still remain in place. And here's how I like to think of these roles. I like to say that it's my responsibility to provide for the needs of the family. Housing, food, clothing, etc. It's my responsibility to provide for the family. I like to think that my wife's work, my wife's collaboration with me, her participation in my work, is not to provide for the needs of the family, but is to increase the quality of life that our family is able to enjoy. The work of provision is my work. That's my burden. I'm responsible to bear that. My wife just spent the last 20 years bearing 10 children. She's done her work, and everything that she does I consider to be extra credit above and beyond that. Anytime that I get frustrated that I don't have more help, or I think that she should help me, it takes about 2 seconds for me to think, this woman bore you 10 children. Get a life. If my wife did nothing else for the rest of her life, and on her deathbed all that we could say about her was that she bore and cared for 10 children, she would have lived a full life. And so nothing, at least in my opinion, nothing more should be required of her. But anything that she's willing to do should be considered a favor. And that's the way I look at it. Now, my wife will not be motivated to work to provide for our family's needs because she doesn't believe it's her responsibility. And I agree with her. I think she's right. That puts pressure on me to work to provide for my family. And that pressure is good for me. I need to have that pressure. I need to have a wife who's going to call me a bum if I'm sitting around the house while the bills are not paid and provided for. That's good for me and necessary. My wife's not going to work to pay the mortgage or pay the grocery bill or buy the kids' clothes. That's my responsibility. My wife, however, will work gladly, voluntarily, to enrich the quality of our family life. So my wife will gladly work, knowing that her work allows us to provide our children with extracurricular activities or special things they need, or holiday decorations, or special treats for the kids, or things like that, things that increase our quality of life. My wife is happy to help and work for those things. She's happy to work and know that the money that she helps earn above and beyond what I earn to provide for the family allows our daughter to take ballet classes. She's happy to work knowing that the money she helps to earn allows our boys to participate in the local wrestling club. She's happy to work to improve our family's quality of life. She's happy to work knowing that her and I can go out and have a nice dinner together with money that she helped to earn. But my wife is not interested in working to provide for the family. That's my job. And so both of us work together in this phase of our life. Now that her childbearing years are over, we work in this way together. I bear the burden. If someone's going to stay up late and work, that's going to be me. If somebody's going to do a miserable job that's necessary, that's going to be me. But my wife is willing to work and can do so happily if she knows that her work is improving our quality of life. And so at this phase of our life, there are all kinds of works for us to do. As our children become adults, in some ways our expenses increase, in some ways our expenses decrease. For example, I haven't cut the grass in a decade. Not having to do tasks because I have teenage sons frees me to devote more of my time and attention to my actual professional work, which generates a responsible income for our family. So there are all of these benefits. But we go through phases of life. Through the childbearing years, the husband has to bear the burden alone. And the wife should have no burden of providing for the needs of the family. This is where all of this pressure on women comes from in the first place. Women are asked to live on contraceptives and abort children and work while pregnant so their husbands don't have to bear any unnecessary pressure. Or I shouldn't even say unnecessary, because it is necessary. So the husband doesn't have to be inconvenienced with working more than the minimal 9 to 5. 5 days a week. If there are bills left unpaid, the husband, punching out at 5 p.m., looks at his wife as if it's her job now to go and earn the rest of the money, when he can't explain why he needs to be home at 5:30 p.m., why he can only work 5 days per week. He doesn't take that burden on himself. He pretends that he should work 9 to 5, and then if anything else is needed, that his wife should go make it. Yet that wife is pregnant. That wife is bearing children. That wife is nursing infants. This selfish, lazy male culture is what puts this pressure on women, and women want to live with a decent quality of life. And so the women are willing to go work. They want to go work. They want their children to be provided for. They want to have money for clothes for the kids. So women, loving their children, are going to be motivated to work. And when men don't take this responsibility on themselves, the women go and do it. And then all kinds of evils enter in. Not because the woman simply desires them, but because the woman feels that her working is necessary, and then all kinds of controversial decisions tend to follow the decision to go to work. I can look back at my own life as a child, and I can divide my childhood into 2 periods. The first period from when I was born until I was around 12 years old, when I had a stay-at-home mother taking care of me 24/7. My mother was home with my sisters and I until I was around 12 years old, and then she went to work. And as soon as my mother went to work, our family life fell apart. And the second phase of my childhood began, which was miserable. And the one thing that changed was that Mom went to work. We stopped going to church. I stopped going to CCD classes. We were taken care of by a grandmother who was very loose with us morally, who allowed us to do all kinds of bad things that my mother would not have allowed us to do. All of that influence came when my mother went to work. And it was just bad decision on top of bad decision on top of bad decision once Mom needed to go to work. And the reason why Mom needed to go to work was because Dad's business was struggling, and instead of Dad rolling up his sleeves and committing to take responsibility, Dad chose to continue working at the same pace. And when the bills started to not be paid, it was my mother's responsibility to go and get the rest. And that's what happens. My grandfather, on the other hand, worked 3 jobs. I hardly ever saw my grandfather, even though he was in his 50s and 60s when I was a kid, because he was still working multiple jobs. I can never even think of my grandfather not working. Even if he was home, he was in the garage working on stuff to try to make some extra money. He used to repair electric motors in his garage at his house. When he wasn't at work, he was working in the garage to make another 10, another 20, another 15, constantly working. And we see the different disposition of different men. I would argue that men are responsible to provide for the needs of their families, and that should never be a burden set upon a woman's shoulders. Never. But as women enter the phase of life naturally, not artificially, but naturally, when they're no longer bearing children or caring for young children, they can begin to work and work steadily and reliably because their bodies are no longer going through the craziness of childbearing, of pregnancy and nursing. they can begin to work a little bit. But I don't believe that they should be working to provide for the needs of their families. I believe that that's always to be the husband's responsibility, and he has decades to develop a career and be able to provide. Now, when men complain about how difficult it is to provide for a family, I have to admit that I laugh, and I have no respect for these men. With God's help, of course, I've been able to provide for a family of 12 as a teacher of the classical liberal arts, working independently, self-employed, since 2008. Before that, I was a school teacher. I made $35,000 a year as an upper school classics teacher, and my family lived comfortably. And then when I went into business on my own in 2008, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to earn a living and provide for this family by teaching the classical liberal arts. How many people would think that a man could earn a living for a family of 12 teaching the classical liberal arts in the 21st century? But I've done it. And when I hear men who are craftsmen or professionals in any other field complaining about how they can't earn a living, I can only laugh, because if a living can be made teaching the classical liberal arts in the 21st century, I really can't believe that a man can't earn a living doing other works, especially more commonly necessary works. And I work from the time I wake up around 7 in the morning until I finally can't stay awake anymore. And I go to bed 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, midnight. I work the whole time. I take a break to go for a walk. I take a break for a family meal. I take a break to say my prayers. I take a break on Sunday, keep the Lord's Day sanctified. I work. That's my job. I provide for the family. The family doesn't need me to watch a TV show. The family doesn't need me to throw a ball on the front yard. The kids can do that together by themselves. The kids need me to work and provide for their needs. To provide for their needs not just as infants, but also for their needs as young adults. The costs increase, but the years that I have to work and develop a career and develop means of income also increases. And these things go together. And my wife, now that she's clear from the burden of childbearing, is free to help me. And that's why this year you'll see her helping me and tutoring alongside me, working with children in the academy. She doesn't do that because we can't pay the mortgage unless she works. She does that because she's no longer bearing children. She has no more babies to take care of, and she's free to engage in other works. She's become a lay Dominican herself. She's a faith formation teacher now. She was never able to do that before. She takes the kids to all of their extracurricular activities, a few of which I mentioned before. She's out most evenings, running kids around to different activities, because she can. It's a different phase of life. And she's happy to work and toil for the quality of our family's life, for the quality of our children's education and development. And I'm free to continue working without interruption for the provision of the family's needs. And that's how we divide labor in our family. My wife is always at home. She bears no burden of work outside the home or financial work. I bear the burden of providing for the family. My wife works to improve our family's quality of life. And that doesn't just mean working for money. That also means doing works of mercy in the community on behalf of our family, serving at the church on behalf of our family, running our children around and participating in their activities to help and enrich their lives, and so on. These are things that she couldn't have done 5 years ago, but she can do now in this phase of life. Now, of course, modern men don't like to hear this. We hear men complaining that if they go and put in a 9-to-5 shift 5 days a week, they should be paid. They have a right to be paid, so that they should need to do no other work and provide for their family. And that's just entitlement talk. Imagine going back a generation or two and telling our grandparents that they shouldn't work more than 8 hours a day. They would laugh us out of the room. No one can explain why a man can only work 8 hours a day. No one can explain that. We're going to sleep 8 hours, then work 8 hours. Well, what about the other 8 hours? Those are just for recreation? That's for television time? That's for wandering around the house? There's no reason why a man needs to live such an easy life. And then cast his burden upon his wife and ask her to do extra because of the needs of the family. He does less than he is capable of, and she's expected to do more than she should need to do, but sometimes more than she's actually capable of. And this is considered normal. And when you look around at women in our society, they just look worn down. They're exhausted. They're being asked to carry burdens that are greater than they can bear, that God didn't intend for them to bear. And you look at the men and you find these soft-bodied, effeminate children walking around with adult-sized bodies because they're not working to bear their own burden. We've had 10 children. We've been self-employed with, I think, a difficult means of employment. And we've enjoyed a happy life as a family. I've been able to maintain my own spiritual life. My wife has been able to maintain her own spiritual life. We've been able to maintain our own intimate marriage relationship. We work together. We enjoy time together. There's time for leisure. There's time for me to study and think. I enjoy quality culture. Even though I'm working all the time, it's a balanced life. I'm not stressed. I'm not anxious. My wife lives in the same circumstances. She cares for 10 children. Most of the time people tell her they can't believe she's had more than a couple children because she looks so good. She looks healthy. She looks young. They can't believe she's a mother of 10 children because she's not bearing a crushing load of responsibility. And when she does work, she works voluntarily within her means in a reasonable way without neglecting all of the other responsibilities that a wife and mother needs to bear. And so in our life, I think the results support this view of the division of labor between a husband and a wife. We've had 10 healthy children, the last 4 or 5 of which were actually born at home because my wife's pregnancies were so healthy and her deliveries so safe. We've never had health insurance because our family's healthy. Our children are safe. We're provided with healthy meals by a wife who stays at home and prepares healthy meals for us. We haven't had sicknesses. We haven't had any need for expensive health care or medical bills or doctor visits. We just don't need these things because the causes of many of the modern diseases are simply prevented by having a capable woman working at home to care for the children and provide for these things. Our expenses are minimized by the fact that I can work deliver my earnings to my wife, and she can administer them as the manager of the household while I work and make sure that everything is used responsibly. We don't have money going all over the place to all kinds of nonsense. And so you just see this collaboration of the working man and the home-oriented. I don't say stay at home because that just gets ridiculous, like spiteful. My wife is oriented around the home, and yet she's out and about throughout the day with the kids doing things. She's not stuck at home in the kitchen peeling potatoes all day long and washing dishes. And yet at the same time, she's never required to leave the home unless it's something that we want her to do, that she wants to do, and it's never done at the expense of someone else. She doesn't do something in a way that causes someone else to sacrifice. The only sacrifice we can ever make is our own self-sacrifice. I think that's another important principle. A husband can't make a decision that causes his wife to sacrifice. A wife can't make a decision that causes her husband to sacrifice. A mother can't make a decision that causes her children to sacrifice. The only person that we can choose to make a sacrifice is ourselves. And that's another principle that I think would destroy many opinions about how the household should be organized. Sure, it's easy to say mom should do this and dad should do this, and then just bill all of the consequences to the children like our society does at the macro level. It's easy to say mom's going to do this, mom wants to do this, and just shove all the kids into daycare to have their toddler years spent with strangers. You really think that's the best situation? It's easy for dad to decide that he's not going to work so much and just tell the kids they don't need Christmas presents, to shut up. It's not necessary. You can do that. The kids are asked to sacrifice for the father. The wife is asked to sacrifice for the husband. The husband is asked to sacrifice for the wife. And that's not how sacrifice works. So when the relationship is arranged like this, like I said, I think that we can see all of the responsibilities maintained, all of the boxes checked. And when we look at other arrangements, I think we'll find gaps and neglected responsibilities and unchecked boxes which prove the ineffectiveness of the arrangement. I can't think of an area of life where my family's arrangement hasn't acted responsibly. We've maintained our religious duties, we've maintained our intellectual and spiritual responsibilities, we've provided for our children, we've provided for our health, we've provided for our financial needs, we've provided for even our parents. When our parents have needed things, we've been able to help our adult children when they've needed to be bailed out of bad decisions. We've been able to do charitable work. This arrangement that nature teaches us allows us to live a rich life, a happy life, a fulfilling life. And while we can listen to other suggestions, my question is just this: will that arrangement provide for an equal or better quality of life, or does it require someone to sacrifice for it to be possible? If an idea is not self-sustaining, it's not a good idea. If an idea requires that someone else pay the bill, it's not a good idea. If an idea requires that someone else work, like slave culture, our culture is going to be like this, and we'll just enslave a race of people and make them go and do the labor so that we can have this. That's not a real option. Our solution to a problem can't require that someone else pay for it. It has to be self-sustaining. And I feel that our life with this arrangement, which I learned about by studying classical philosophy, by studying the teaching of the sacred scriptures, the teaching of the Catechism of the Church, and simply reasoning through what's best in our own family life, I feel that we have checked the boxes and continue to check new boxes that arise. And I feel that we've done that happily. And so others will disagree with us. They may say to my wife that they think she's nuts, or they may think that I'm a jerk or whatever, but we don't care, because I don't know that they can provide a better alternative. So that would be my answer to the question, how should labor and responsibility be divided between a husband and a wife? I've lived this life for 25 years now, and I can tell you that I'm very happy, even though I have this burden to bear. And I would love to talk about the details, because it's comical how difficult things can get, and yet how there's always a way to get through it. And I believe that my wife would agree that she's also very happy in her life, and she has been happy, and she feels fulfilled and satisfied being a mother of 10 children, being able to now be a lay Dominican, to be a faith formation teacher, to be able to work with me and get back to the work that she desired to do when she was a college student herself. She sees all of these things come full circle as she enters into a new phase of her life where we don't need her to be in the kitchen and caring for babies anymore. She has freedom at this phase of her life to get to work with me and do new things, which has been fun. So as I said, while others may disagree, want to call names and get frustrated by these things, I really don't care, because I haven't seen a better arrangement. And I know that this arrangement works with a large family, allowing everyone to be very happy. Our family has excellent relationships. This past Sunday, for example, we've got kids home ages 7, 8 to 22, and every kid who was home was at Mass on Sunday. I don't know how many families can say that with adult children, and I would honestly confess that religion is probably our family's weakness, to tell you the truth. I think that, I'm a first-generation Catholic. My wife is a first-generation Catholic. We have no Catholic family members. Our Catholic life has been a real uphill battle for us, with many, many struggles. I would say that religion is actually our weakness. And yet, we've still maintained Catholic family life with intimate relationships. All of our children have been confirmed by the Church. So I think that our arrangement and how we've managed our household speaks for itself. And if you'd like to talk about this or get into some of the details, I'd be happy to do so. God bless.